it's Meredith and welcome back to my channel. So today I am going to be talking about the 10 most disappointing or worst books that I read in 2021. So the reason that I kind of combined my most disappointing and my worst is because I didn't have a ton of one-star reads this year. I actually enjoyed most of the books that I read. So all of these books besides the last two are basically just disappointing books that I was expecting a little more from this year. So starting off is a book that I didn't think was bad. I was just kind of expecting a different story from it, and that was Shipped by Angie Hockman. I know that a lot of people really loved this book, and when I heard people talk about it, I was just expecting this really cute romance that happens on a cruise ship, because it had been marketed as a hating game meets the Unhoneymooners, and so that sounded so perfect for me. Those are two of my favorite romances, and so when I went into this expecting that cutesy romance, I was just really disappointed because it really just felt like a story about two coworkers who go on a cruise together. Our main character is really focused on getting this promotion and competing with the love interest for this promotion, and that is the main focus of this book rather than the romance. And I think that's what threw me off, is there's not tons of tension, which I was expecting there would be due to the forced proximity. And I don't know, I was just kind of disappointed with what this book delivered. Next up is The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. I know that a lot of people got a very powerful message out of this book, and that is basically what I was expecting from the book. I thought I would leave it feeling really good about myself and just feeling really positive, and unfortunately I didn't get that from this book. I found the book a bit boring, a bit repetitive, and it just felt like it was trying too hard to have that your life is worth living message in the book. And like I said, it was just repetitive. I ended up just really not caring about the character or the different versions of her life that she was living. I don't really know what exactly the book needed for me to get that message out of it, but unfortunately, it didn't really do it for me. Next are two books that I kind of just clumped together because they are written by the same author in the same universe, and that is The Chase and The Mistake by Elle Kennedy. I read the Off-Campus series earlier this year, and I really loved the first book, The Deal. I thought that it was cute. It took on some pretty heavy topics in a pretty good way, in my opinion. It did have an impact on the story. It wasn't just thrown in there for the sake of there being trauma with the character, and that's something that I think is really important. So when I went into The Mistake, which is the second book, I was expecting to have the same experience with the book, just that overall great feeling with it, and unfortunately I didn't get that. I didn't really like Grace or Logan, and I thought that the book was really cheesy, and it was really disappointing overall. And I thought that it was trying a little too hard to be The Deal without being as good as The Deal. It had a lot of the same topics that were brought up, but it just wasn't done in the same way, and I didn't really love it. It was still a 3-star, so I still had fun with it overall, but just coming after The Deal, it was disappointing. And then The Chase is by far my least favorite book that I've read from Elle Kennedy that's in this off-campus Briar U world. This is the first book in the Briar U series, and I was expecting to love it. It's the first one out of the new series. I had such a great experience with The Deal and the score, and it just was so corny and so cheesy, and I thought that Summer's character was just so annoying, and Fitz was just a jerk for the majority of the book, and I just genuinely did not like this book. So those were two books that just really disappointed me because it's always heartbreaking when an author can write books that you just absolutely adore and then some are just such a disappointment. Next is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This book is a favorite of so many of my favorite booktubers. I mean, I went into this book thinking that it would just be the easiest 5-star, and I was so let down. This book is described as this big competition that these magicians have to compete in, and only one of them can make it out, and then there's this epic romance that happens, and that is just everything that I need in a book. And so reading this, I just kept waiting and waiting for the action to happen and for the romance to blossom, and it was all just so disappointing. I was expecting this to just be some crazy competition that they've been working towards for their whole life, and we barely get to see the competition. It's barely even explained to them, much less the reader. And so I just was so upset that the competition was not this some grand thing, because when I heard a competition where only one person makes it out, I thought Hunger Games. Like immediately I was thinking that it was going to be this epic competition like in the Hunger Games, and it wasn't. It was very boring. And then the romance just came out of nowhere. Like, these characters go from having hardly any communication with each other to just being in love. And I just, again, the Hunger Games set me up for me thinking that this would be a book where the two competitors are in this tough situation because they're fighting against each other, but then they end up having this romance, and it wasn't that. It was very slow, very boring. I mean, it's a long book. I think this is like, it's about 500 pages or a little over 500, and it's just a lot of nothing that happens. And I will say that the descriptions in the book did save it for me a little bit, because you feel like you're at this circus. I mean, Erin Morgenstern really describes the smells and the sights that you would be seeing, and unfortunately that was pretty much the only part of the book that I liked, because I kept just getting so excited that it was going to build and build and build, and I just never got that final like moment with it. But yeah, so this was a disappointment, but I know a lot of people love it, so if you're interested, maybe pick it up. But I unfortunately did not enjoy this book as much as everyone else did. Next up is Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. I have already talked about this book in my mid-year freakout tag and in the monthly wrap-up, but for those of you who did not see those videos, I will briefly mention my quick reasons that this book was disappointing for me, because it is so hyped and so loved, and I know that this is a controversial opinion, but I just found the book very cringy, and it reads like a YA book even though it's not a YA book. I mean, the way that the characters talk to each other is the just over the top cringy way that characters might talk to each other in a YA book, and it was really taking me out of the book, because I did like these characters and I didn't know why they were talking to each other in just these really corny ways. I also am not a big fan of real life politics in books after I had gotten through the bulk of this book, and it wasn't really what I was expecting, and then the end is just a big election. I just didn't personally care, and I didn't like that that was the big ending of the book. I just wish it would have focused more on the relationship between the two rather than a big political election. I don't know, I was just expecting to like this book a lot more than I did. Next up, Redemption Prep by Samuel Miller. I should have known that this book was going to disappoint me from the awful Goodreads reviews that it had. I mean, I think the average rating for this book is like a 2.5 to a 2.7. It's very low and lower than the majority of most books that I read. Nonetheless, I held out hope because the author, Samuel Miller, was the lead singer of a band called Paradise Spheres, who I absolutely adored when I was in high school into early college. I would go to all of their shows and they would just chat with everyone who was there, and it was just such a good time. And when the lead singer announced that he was going to start writing books, I was so excited. I rated his first one 5 stars, which I do want to go back and read because I don't know if I would have those same opinions today, but I had been putting this one off because of the negative reviews that it had. I was just so intrigued to read this dark academia about this school that has some secrets, and it just sounded fascinating to me. And I'll be honest, through about 50 to 60% of the book, I was so intrigued. I was so excited because I was thinking, this book is so fascinating. It's dark, it's twisty. I'm going to be the one person that enjoyed this book. I was just so happy about it. And then the twist came, and I hated everything about it. It took this book from a 4-star straight to a 2-star because I just hated the twist. It was so, for lack of a better word, stupid. The feeling that this book gave me after reading it was the same feeling that I had after I watched American Horror Story Asylum, where the entire thing is just so good and so twisty and you don't know where it's going, and then it just comes up with this really just ending that comes out of nowhere, and you're like, what did that have to do with anything that I just read or watched? I don't want to give away spoilers, even though I'm sure that I'm not convincing any of you to read this right now, but man, I was so disappointed. It was not good. So my next 2 spots are from the same author, unfortunately, which is Tessa Bailey, and those 2 books are It Happened One Summer and Fix Her Up. So first I will talk about It Happened One Summer because that was I guess the one I liked the most out of the 2, but I just wasn't a fan of it still. I don't know if I had heard a single negative review about this book when I went into it. I was expecting to really love it, and it just was not the book for me. The storyline was just very convenient and cheesy and just dull. And this is such an unpopular opinion, but I did not like Brendan, who is the main love interest. I found him so boring and just very brooding, and not in a good way. And just the way he would talk, I just found it very cringy, especially in the spicy scenes. It was not for me. It was definitely just, I don't know how to describe it. It was just very, it wasn't for me is what I'll say. And I really wish that this story hadn't been compared so much to Schitt's Creek, because Schitt's Creek is one of my favorite shows. I really adore it. And so comparing Piper to Alexis, I wish I just would have had a blank slate and been able to imagine my own character. I didn't love the storyline of her being this party girl who's never had to work a day in her life to being dropped in this town where just very quickly she is living in just this really dirty, dingy place, and she's completely renovating a bar with her sister, and she's all of a sudden fitting into this town way more than you would expect her to. It just felt so convenient. This book really reminded me of The Simple Wild by K.A. Tucker, but I think that that one was just done so much better, because in that book our main character is dropped into this town that she is not really familiar with, and she has a lot of adjusting to do, and I think that you see that a lot, and the love interest in that book really gives her a hard time for that. Not saying that Brendan should have treated Piper badly or anything, but I was just so surprised at the quick turnaround of Brendan thinking she was just this prissy LA girl to all of a sudden being so in love with her and thinking she has all of this heart behind her. And I don't know, I think The Simple Wild was done a lot better. It's kind of a very similar story, but unfortunately It Happened One Summer was just not for me. On that note, another Tessa Bailey that was not for me, like I mentioned, Fix Her Up. This book I just really didn't like anything about. So this book follows Georgie the clown and her journey into convincing her family that she is not a child anymore, and she has this romance with a baseball player. And it's just, I just really don't think Tessa Bailey's writing hits home with me. It's a lot more of like a cheesy, passionate writing rather than the cutesy, like building up a relationship more so, if that makes sense. I like when relationships, you can really see them develop, and I personally don't see that a lot with Tessa Bailey's writing. It kind of goes like 0 to 60 where the characters might not necessarily like each other at first, and then all of a sudden they're like in love. Those are my jumbled opinions on those two books. I'm sure that a lot of people will disagree with that opinion, and that is perfectly fine. I know that a lot of people really love Tessa Bailey's writing, and I really wish that I did because I feel like I'm missing out on something. But that being said, I just don't think her writing's for me. So now it's time to get into some of the worst books that I read in 2021. I know that I've already been talking about the most disappointing, but now these are the 1-star I didn't like anything about books of 2021. First off, being the first book that I read this year, which was In a Holidays by Christina Lauren. Part of me feels like I'm a little harsh on this book because it is just a holiday romance. It's not supposed to be some groundbreaking, crazy story, but it's just so messy and chaotic. I mean, this book was written like they could not decide on the plot for a holiday romance, so they just shoved everything into this book. So first off, I don't like the characters in the book. They were very boring. They didn't really have any qualities that I really enjoyed, and I hated the random Groundhog Day time jump that only happens for the first third of the book. Like, that's what this book is described as. It's described as like a holiday Groundhog Day where she keeps going back in time, but it only happens for a portion of the book. And then, like I mentioned, there is a love triangle, and there's one portion of the love triangle that is played up to be this important guy. Like, you're led to believe that he is more important than he is, and then like there's certain things that are just not addressed with him. And I don't want to give too much away, which is why this sounds vague, but like, Christina Lauren, what was going on in this book? Since this was the first book that I read this year, I've dragged it enough on my channel, but yeah, it was just not for me. So, which is sad. I wanted to love a holiday romance. The cover's cute. The cover's cute. It's only redeeming quality. And lastly, the worst book that I read in 2021, 99% Mine by Sally Thorne. This book was so bad that I wanted to give it a 0. But that's not possible. So I give it a 1. I genuinely cannot think of a single thing that I enjoyed about this book. I hated the characters. Darcy is the most unlikable main character that I've ever read about in a romance. She is the typical I'm not like other girls character, and Sally Thorne does not let us forget that throughout the entire book. We're constantly reminded that she has short hair, not long hair like other girls, and her candy addiction, which is just rotting out her teeth and not good for her heart condition, and also her casual alcoholism, which is really not addressed in the book. I also hated being inside her head. So the love interest Tom is engaged in the first part of the book, or so we're led to believe, and the things that Darcy thinks about him are so inappropriate for someone to be thinking about someone who is marrying someone else. I really dislike cheating in books, and there's not necessarily cheating, but I just felt like if Tom made a move or showed any interest in Darcy, that there would have been cheating, because she just makes it blatantly obvious that she does not respect his relationship in the slightest, and there's no reason for her not to. Also, when I heard people describe this book, I thought that the idea of Tom becoming more Darcy's sounded a little cute. So like how at first he's only 1% hers, and then, you know, eventually throughout the book he becomes a little more hers. I thought that sounded cute, but then reading it, it's so possessive and childish and gross. Like, there's literally a part in this book where Darcy is fighting with her brother and she looks at him and she says, "I'm keeping him." Like, he's a person, he's not your possession. There's also a conflict at the end because Darcy and her twin brother Jamie do not get along at all, and Darcy is arguing with him and she completely disregards Tom's request to keep their relationship private because he wants to have the conversation with his friend. She completely disregards that just so she can win an argument with her brother, and I just really didn't like that. I mean, she is just so childish. It's just infuriating. Like I said, I hated the characters, I hated the story. It was really just making me angry reading it, and that makes me sad because The Hating Game is one of my favorite romances, and this was Sally Thorne's second book, and so just to go from The Hating Game to this is really sad. So those were my top 10 most disappointing or worst books of the year. Let me know down below if any of these books were also on your most disappointing lists of the year, or if you disagree with any of my opinions, which I'm sure that people will because I do have a lot of more popular books on this list. So thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to giving you a more positive video with my top 10 coming soon. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel if you would like to see more bookish content from me, and I will see you guys soon. Bye!